Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's weekly podcast on the big developments in the region. My name is Amran Zaman, and this week I'll be discussing the forthcoming elections in Turkey with the Economist's Turkey correspondent, Piotr Zalewski. Piotr is the author of a special survey published by The Economist last week. It caused quite a commotion due to its cover, which appeared with the title Turkey's Looming Dictatorship. Senior Turkish officials were not amused. They took turns to blast the publication, accusing it of intellectual sloth and indulging in marketing gimmicks. But few can deny the substance is fair and that the analysis is sharp. The report covers a broad range of issues, from Turkey's ailing economy to Ankara's combative foreign policy. Despite Turkey's descent into authoritarianism, Piotr does not rule out an opposition victory, though the chances are admittedly slim. So, Piotr, welcome to our program. It's so great to have you with us here today, particularly given how tired you are after your grueling trip to Ukraine. So, thank you.
Thanks, Amber. It's a pleasure.
So you've just published this amazing report on Turkey, and obviously you're kind of in the hot seat right now because quite predictably, the Turkish government was not terribly happy with the title, Turkey's Looming Dictatorship. So Piotr, the reason you were prompted to do this report presumably was because of this looming election. Why do these elections matter so much?
I think we've probably heard over the past 10 years that every next election in Turkey is the most important election in Turkish history. And so it's no surprise that these have acquired the label. But I think, the label is quite merited. I mean, I guess first you have the symbolism of it all. It is the centenary of the founding of the Republic. It's an election that will decide the political fate of President Erdogan. He has suggested it, might be the last election in which he runs. Obviously, at stake is not only his political career, but also the direction of Turkish foreign policy, the direction of Turkish economic policy, and the entire system over which he presides. His idea of a new Turkey, his executive presidency, all of that is on the line.
With the system so tightly rigged in favor of President Erdogan and his Justice and Development Party, is there any chance that the opposition can actually win?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is one of the paradoxes of Turkey, in that it's too often dismissed as a dictatorship, and it's not. You have academics who use the label competitive authoritarianism, but what I think that speaks to is the notion that obviously Erdogan runs the show. This is one-man rule, but he's still having to face the electorate every 5 years, and elections are, while blatantly unfair, competitive, and that's why it's hard to predict, especially this time around, the result of this election, where at least judging by the polls, Erdogan has his back against the wall. I think for him, it looks to be the toughest election that he has faced. I think you might recall, in the report I quoted, Berk Esen, an academic here in Istanbul, and he compares elections in Turkey to a football match, a soccer match, where one side has 11 players and the other side has 7. That's a pretty accurate way of putting it. I'd say maybe it's 11 to 8 or 11 to 9. And this time around, it seems that even before the matches started, the referee has given one of the opposition's star players a red card for calling him an idiot. The playing field is badly tilted. You have a government, you have a president who controls directly and indirectly, let's say 90% of the media who effectively cannot hold the government, especially the president, to account, which is essentially what the media is expected to do in a democracy. And you have the institutions, which for the most part, function at the government's behest. And among these is the central bank, which has effectively turned into something like a government agency. And this isn't about, monetary policy per se. Just to give you an idea of how this affects the landscape ahead of elections, if you could argue that if Turkey right now were to have an independent, a truly independent central bank, the economy would be in recession, right? And that obviously would have a huge impact on the outcome of the elections, on the run-up to the elections. There's still reason to suspect that the opposition might win. It's always something of a surprise to me to hear the debate in Turkey, to compare the debate in Turkey with the debate abroad. So, the consensus abroad, I think, among analysts and perhaps political class, is that Erdogan will win the elections because losing is not an option, and that he will do whatever it takes. And there's no shortage of things he can do to ensure that he wins. Meanwhile, in Turkey, those fears are here. Those fears are very much present in the Turkish discourse. But I mean, as you know, Turks, for the most part, have tremendous faith in the electoral process, and so you'll ask, the average Turkish voter, even opposition voter, about the elections, and they'll say, the outcome is certainly not a foregone conclusion. And I mentioned the turnout in Turkish elections over the past 5-10 years, and turnout has been in the 80s, in the high 80s occasionally, and that speaks to the idea that people do believe that their vote counts. And generally, I think opposition voters in Turkey are more worried about the coming 3.5 months than they are about the conduct of the elections themselves, because have a bit of a paradox, right? That on the one hand, the accepted faith, the accepted wisdom is that Erdogan cannot afford to lose an election, whereas Turks, at least opposition Turks, will tell you that he does not have the luxury of rigging one either. So the opposition expects an unfair fight, but I think come election day, they believe that they have a chance.
You mentioned one of the star players about to be disqualified, and you were referring obviously to Ekrem İmamoğlu, the Istanbul mayor, who delivered Erdogan his first ever defeat by winning Istanbul and resoundingly in the redo. It seems increasingly likely, though, that it won't be him, and rather will be Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the CHP leader, the main opposition party leader, who you, as described in your report, doesn't hold a candle to Erdogan when it comes to, his ability to appeal to the masses, to campaign. We've also seen more recently that Erdogan's numbers are creeping up again.
Do you still say the opposition has a chance of winning?
For an opposition that wants to dismantle the presidential system and that wants to return to a ceremonial presidency, he's the ideal president. But at the same time, he is the worst candidate, right? Best president, but the worst candidate for president.
That's really well put, Piotr. And of course, in all of this, the Kurds are poised to play a quite significant role, as they already did in the municipal elections. And of course, one of the biggest problems plaguing this opposition, this so-called table of 6 opposition parties, is the fact that they're so polarized, divided on the issue of the Kurds, with Meral Akşener, the right-wing nationalist leader, saying she basically doesn't want to have anything to do with them. I mean, do you believe that there's a chance that to secure to sort of clinch his success, that Erdogan could yet make a turn towards the Kurds?
I haven't seen really much evidence of Erdogan, putting out feelers to Kurdish voters. I mean, I guess he was in Diyarbakir. AK Party met with HDP, I think, to discuss the headscarf issue, if I recall correctly. But I think there's practically no chance that he will be able to successfully reach out to Kurdish voters. It would be too little too late.
I tend to think that Erdogan will prevail. What kind of Turkey will we wake up to? And first of all, the economy, because, I mean, everyone's been predicting a crash and it's just not happened. Somehow the economy seems to sort of tick along, whether it's through mass influxes of funds from the Gulf, Russia selling cheap energy, whatever it is. Somehow, it sort of still stands. That's my first question, and the second one would be about foreign policy, because Turkey is clearly butting heads more and more with its Western partners, and this is playing out in particular over over Finland and Sweden's application for membership for NATO. Do you think that's more of an electoral gambit, or will that trend persist, one of, Turkey becoming increasingly sort of irredentist and going its own way?
I figure maybe there's a way to tie those two questions together. How sustainable is Turkey's economic policy, and how sustainable is Turkey's foreign policy? So, when we look at the opposition, their remedy for the Turkish economy is quite clear, which is to tackle inflation head on, restore the central bank's independence. That would obviously mean increasing substantially, gradually, interest rates, cleaning up the institutions, rebuilding not only the central bank's reputation, but also its foreign currency reserves. Less predictable is what the Turkish economy might look like if Erdogan is reelected, because people, I mean, we've seen this before, right? I mean, he will push for growth, lower interest rates, even in the face of increasing inflation and in face of a weakening lira, and then allow the central bank to hit the brakes and to hike interest rates. He's done that before, and I feel like, especially in the West, there's this assumption that he's probably going to have to do the same after the elections. Here, there isn't so much a consensus in the issue, but there's a bigger concern that this rather zany economic policy is here to stay.
Is that sustainable? I mean, is that sustainable?
No, it's not. It's not. I mean,
will it stabilize the lira? Won't Turkish people grow even poorer? And isn't that inherently destabilizing? And isn't his likely response to be more repression?
There's going to be a reckoning, whoever comes out on top, right? It's just going to be a different reckoning for the opposition and a different reckoning for Erdogan. Now, he's been able to, this government has been able to, at least by recent standards, stabilize the lira in the past half year. The lira continues to weaken, but that weakening is no longer vertical as it was at least at the end of 2021. And he's been able to do so, by way of his banking regulations, by effectively rationing credit, which is also a major concern for the opposition and honestly for the health of the Turkish economy and for corruption, because you've got a system where money is effectively handed out for free. You've got a benchmark interest rate at 9%, inflation at 65%, and loans handed out at, I don't know, let's say around 20%. So if you're a loss-making company, but you manage to get a loan from a Turkish bank, well, at the end of the year, you're still actually turning a profit, simply because of the kind of advantages that loan confers on you. And so there's concern that credit is being channeled to not only certain sectors of the economy or certain companies, SMEs and exporters in particular, but to companies that are close to government. And as you pointed out, money coming in from UAE, from Qatar, from Russia, has been helping keep the lira afloat. But that money is not endless, and I think that money is arriving in Turkey, and it's helping sustain, or it's helping Erdogan offset potential damage to lira and helping him through to elections. I don't imagine it's going to be readily available after the elections. At which point, one of two things will have to happen. A is, a return to orthodoxy, and that's the scenario we're talking about. And B is a major correction in the exchange rate, which means another possibly massive devaluation of the lira, yet more inflation, because that would be its inevitable outcome, and yet more damage to purchasing power of Turks, right? I mean, we've already seen part of the middle class disappear over the past 2 or 3 years, largely as a result of inflation, as a result of these policies. Chances are that this is something that will continue and might even accelerate especially in case of an Erdogan victory. The question of sustainability, because you asked, if this business with Finland and Sweden, if this is something that will go away after the elections, and if something approaching a return to orthodoxy in foreign policy might be imminent if Erdogan wins. I don't see that happening. I mean, as far as Finland and Sweden, that's a symptom of the sort of fundamental shift in foreign policy rather than its cause. It's very difficult to understand what exactly Turkey is driving at, right? Because the goalposts keep on moving, seemingly. At first, Erdogan came up with a list of, I don't remember exact number, 79, was it?
Something like that.
Suspected terrorists.
It keeps going up. The number keeps
right. And
up.
I think now, we've reached 130 something. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, all of this, the first figure was a huge shock to the Swedes. The second figure, I imagine, was an even bigger shock. And now, given the outcry, over the Quran burning incident in Sweden, I think a lot of people might start asking, does Turkey is Turkey even serious about accepting Sweden and NATO into sorry, is Turkey even serious about accepting Sweden and Finland into NATO? And to report, well, for this report and but also for previous reporting I've done, I remember talking to some of Erdogan's advisors and people the MFA, right? So the MFA's line is that where Finland and Sweden to comply with Turkish demands, obviously the onus is more on Sweden than Finland, then Turkey would happily welcome Sweden and Finland into NATO because Turkey recognizes the value, the strategic value of having the Nordics in NATO. The line I got on a number of occasions while speaking with people in the palace is that we're not terribly interested in NATO enlargement, or at least we're not terribly interested in NATO enlargement in Finland and Sweden. And it's as if, and the question I asked was, well, what about do you see the advantages of Turkish, of Finnish or Swedish membership in NATO, even with this alleged terrorist issue out of the way? And I didn't really get a very convincing answer.
So what's that all about then? I mean,
well, that's the thing. I mean, it's first of all, this came out of nowhere when it happened, right? I mean, I think even people in the MFA were surprised with how the veto first came about. I mean, there were concerns about PKK running wild in Sweden for years now, right? Those concerns were shared by the MFA and other people in Turkey, but I don't think there was much of an expectation that that Turkey, that everyone would veto their potential accession to NATO over this. I figured the understanding was that this was something that would be sorted out in bilateral meetings, and so that people were talking about the shock to the Finns and Swedes when this all went down. I think some people in the Turkish MFA were equally or almost equally shocked.
So is this about Putin? Is this about Erdogan and Putin, and Erdogan, doing favors to Putin, believing that his interests lie more there than with the West, and that he can keep playing this sort of balancing act that he's gotten away with so far, admittedly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're hypothesizing. Sorry, we're speculating, but why not? Because that's all we're left with at this point. I don't imagine that Russia is behind this, right? That Putin called in a favor with Erdogan. But you remember when the issue first came up, a lot of folks thought that this was not about Turkey, Sweden, and Finland. This was more about Turkey and the U.S. And it was more about the S-400 issue, F-35s, F-16s, and that Turkey was trying to squeeze concessions out of Biden administration and Congress. Look, it could just as well be that Turkey is holding this sort of ace in its hand. And making, implicit or not, sort of an offer to Russia. What could you give us in exchange for this? I don't know if this conversation is being had at the policy level, but there's two people that this impasse favors, right? The impasse over Sweden, Finland, and NATO. One is Erdogan because it favors him domestically, and the other is Putin for reasons we don't have to spell out. Is there an understanding there? I don't know, but there's certainly room for one. Could this be part of a larger tit for tat? Where Syria, reconciliation with Syria, a potential Turkish offensive against the YPG is in the picture or in the mix? Possibly. I mean, it's happened before, but the Turkey-Russia relationship is so multifaceted, so multi-layered. There's so many opportunities, for barter, that you could very well imagine this is part of the picture. But unfortunately, it's quite indecipherable at this point.
Well, you just got back from Ukraine. How do things look from Ukraine? I mean, for the Ukrainians, it must be a rather sort of not ideal situation that Turkey is sort of catering to Russia all the while, claiming to be Ukraine's big friend. How much does Turkey matter? I mean, obviously, for just looking at the map, we know why it matters to Ukraine, but is Turkey's military support still very significant?
It's much less visible and it's much less significant. I think, look, I mean, the Turkish drones, the Bayraktars, did contribute heavily to Kiev's defense, and I think Ukrainians are incredibly grateful for the supply, for the sale of the TB2s. They're obviously grateful to Turkey for the closure of the straits to Russian warships. But they're also, quite uneasy. I think, interestingly, they're more uneasy in private than they are in public. In public, Zelensky has a habit of upbraiding, Western leaders. He's criticized obviously the Germans in the past, the Hungarians, even the Poles. I think came under criticism when they came up with some sort of harebrained idea near the start of the war, and we haven't heard any of that criticism from Zelensky toward Turkey. And I'm made to understand that the reason for this is that you can go over Macron's head. You can go over Scholz's head. You can appeal to public opinion in France. You can appeal to public opinion in Poland, and you can appeal to public opinion in Germany to put pressure on their leaders. You can't quite do that with Turkey. Well, first of all, because public opinion in Turkey is quite divided when it comes to the war, and second, well, because Turkey, politics in Turkey works quite differently, and Erdogan is a much more unpredictable interlocutor than someone like Macron and someone like Scholz. So in a way, the Ukrainians are left expressing, platitudes and then thanking Turkey publicly for its support. And I think that thanks, that gratitude is certainly genuine, but there's certainly a lot of criticism.
Well, look, Piotr, it was really great speaking to you, and I hope we'll have more opportunities in the future.
Well, and thanks for having me, and really appreciate it, Amberi.
And this brings us to the end of this week's On the Middle East. Do try and get a copy of the Economist special survey on Turkey. It's well worth a read. Hoping to catch up with you next week. Till then, thank you and goodbye.